Welcome to A Human Perspective, a podcast where I'll be sharing work and personal experiences and learnings. I will also chop it up with guests from time to time who will also share their own perspectives. I can't promise everything you hear on this podcast will always be right, but I can promise to always give you a human perspective. My name is Lola Oguntoken, and I'm your host. Let's go. On this episode of A Human Perspective, we have a dear friend, Vasco Figueira. We actually work together at a fintech company. Vasco is currently a senior software engineer at IOV42. Welcome to the podcast, Vasco. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
So Vasco and I, as I mentioned before, worked at a fintech company. It was a B2C software company, and I think the product itself was a very good product. I thought it would be good to have a conversation about how to build an effective team. This is something that we actually had to do together, with me working on the people recruitment side and Vasco being a senior member of the engineering team. And I think it was a big learning, well, certainly for me. Don't know what you think, Vasco.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. It's really hard and difficult to get right. It requires you to be aware of your blind spots. So it's definitely a learning experience. I think the most effective advice there is that those that make you reflect on your shortcomings than those that tell you about reality outside of yourself.
Absolutely. Why is building an effective team important?
Oh, well, that's an easy answer. I know it goes beyond that. Sure, that's why you ask it. But let's start with the simple answer, because you want to build things, you want to be effective, right? But essentially, it's because it can be very, very expensive to not be so. It can tank a company, even if you have a great business model, if you have market fit, but your team struggles with effectiveness for whatever reason, the company might not survive. Maybe the company will still survive, but it might be a long struggle, and it doesn't need to be that way. I've met very few people in my career that were truly incompetent, honestly. It's always more about the arrangement we find ourselves in, the context in which we work, that renders us effective or non-effective, or groups of us effective or non-effective. So yeah, it's absolutely critical. When we get it right, it's also a joy and everyone's happy. An ineffectual team will cause all sorts of problems, not just financial. People will start churning, people come in, they look at the code base and, oh my God, what am I doing here? Simple changes face a lot of friction, and non-software departments and other people start thinking, what are these people doing? Is it that difficult to add a combo box there in that page? So it becomes a real drag for the whole company and for the people in it. And the tragedy, if you will, is that it's so within reach to avoid that scenario. We only get into that scenario when I claim perhaps, happy to be proven wrong, but that's my claim, that only when people who don't understand how software is built are the ones in charge.
In your estimation, let's say, how common do you think it is that teams aren't effective? Because obviously the work that you do will never be perfect. It will always be a work in progress. But in terms of actually working together effectively, having the right people taking initiatives or the lead, etc., how common do you think that is?
Estimations for that will necessarily vary wildly. It's like so many other things in society. It's so unevenly distributed, isn't it? I remember starting my career and thinking in the first few projects as a junior consultant, well, that's not really how you should build software. And I instinctively knew that. I didn't know exactly what the solutions were, like how exactly should it be developed then. But I knew it was wrong, and I kind of spent possibly the first 7, 8, 9 years of my career trying to find a place that actually knew how to build software. So I'm going to say that it's fairly rare that you find such places where the whole practice has a common understanding of how things should be done. And that is, in my subjective opinion, a good understanding and an effective understanding. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you mentioned the impact of having the right founder or founders involved. If you don't have a tech founder, actually the perspective that they're coming from means that they're coming from a place where the solution maybe works in a non-technical sense, but it doesn't translate into a technical sense. And they're using that to drive the build of the product. I think interestingly, I've also seen where perhaps the tech co-founder hasn't seen enough. They haven't experienced enough. And, maybe they're just using experiences from one or two places to push how development should be done. And that has also withheld the potential of a product as well, because they're unable to step outside of that developer mindset, that software engineer, hands-on software engineer mindset as well.
Yeah, just cut away mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on that, because the fact is humans are fallible. It doesn't matter who you put there at the top. There's always going to be something.
Yes. You can get it wrong by directing people the wrong way. And that can be because you're, not a technical person or because you lack some technical experience. But you can also be technically very good, but not transmit to the team and propagate ideas such that they would create a culture where the right behaviors are in place. Yes. So I've also seen technically competent CTOs fail to deliver a message that they would know was right. They would know how to build software effectively. They would actually have in their heads a nice idea about how the architecture should evolve and whatnot. Yeah. Transferring that to a team and a culture can also fail.
I do wonder sometimes, with companies like Google or the back end of Amazon or your Teslas, because they've worked in a certain way to get them to this point. And yes, we'll know it's aggressively. I'm sure it's been very intense for the software engineers that have been involved in those early days. But I do wonder how much of it is a technical brain or lead actually dictating the culture, and those that fall in line because they do, that's what's enabled them to work in a certain way. The technical lead just happened to have the right kind of principles that worked versus one that kind of gave a loose feel of this is the way that we work. You take ownership of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of leadership can be, it's not necessary in the sense that the same principles and the same culture can emerge organically. Previously, I spoke about a leader and a CTO, but it needn't really be that way. You can have a founding team that is very collaborative, might not even have a leader. And yes, I've seen that happen. If anyone of you hearing us saying, oh, no, this is just... no, I've seen that work, and it can really work. What matters is that the culture is set in place, and that when I say culture, it's not just the ways of working or what types of meetings occur on a regular basis or whether the fridge is stocked or not. No, not at all. None of that. It's the principles behind precise behaviors, the actual behaviors that happen. And that can go from the idea that what you want is statically typed languages because some reason, to should we use microservices or should we use something else? So that's what I talk when I refer to culture. I'll include all of that, the ways of working in making software. So that doesn't need to be specified by one single person. In fact, I'm coming to realize more and more that it's harmful when it happens that way. Sure, you can have a natural hierarchy that forms for certain dimensions. So on this dimension, I might respect such and such individuals more than others. And another dimension, I might respect. You might be lucky if the one you have on the org chart, if you do have one, matches the natural hierarchy. And that's good, because then communication channels would match that as well. Naturally, people will understand the need for doing what is kind of agree that needs being done. What is important is that culture is accepted. It is accepted as how we do things here. Everybody is more or less in tune and not against it.
I've worked with quite a few startup companies, and what I've seen quite often, what we're battling is the legacy of that first hire in the team, or the first few hires in the team, and what that legacy looks like, right? It really does depend on who is first brought in. Having worked for quite a few startups, I believe many make the mistake, I'll be bold to say, of hiring based on cost. So we've got this budget and we need someone to just do the work. They're not looking for someone to come in who will be thoughtful about what they're doing and thinking, okay, but how does this impact the product and what we're trying to build in 5 years? You know, they hire very much right now, what can we do and how can we make this work? I kind of feel that's an anti-engineering mindset in itself. But there are people who do work like that. And I quite often see that it just holds everyone back in terms of what they can really do when it comes to developing. How important do you think that first hire is?
Oh, terribly. So I think it's all nice to apply lean principles to your startup, absolutely. But when you start compromising on quality instead of compromising on the scope of the things you want to build, you'll set yourself up for future costs to be knocking on your door kind of forever. A lot of them, a lot of times. It's terribly important to have a good first hire or a good technical direction from the start, because what is done at that point constrains in so many ways and in a very hard way what can be done after. That will be the person that chooses, say, a framework to be used in the first component of your product. That will be the person that will start choosing essential aspects of the architecture that then will be difficult to change. And don't forget that it's not just technical choices. When you choose, for example, a Drupal framework or a Haskell one, you are choosing to draw from very different pools of talent out there. And they have different parameters. There's not a lot of Haskell developers, but they might be arguably better, I'd say, even in terms of correctness of the solutions that are built, in terms of the high integrity of such solutions and things like that. People do specialize in different things. And it's important to understand the sociology that comes attached to technical decisions. It really is preponderant. It really is preponderant. You get different folk, and you need to understand what you're getting in.
Yes.
There might not be a right or wrong answer depending on what you're trying to build. It might be fine to build with this or that or whatever. What you probably want to avoid is to draw from disagreeing pools of people, if you will. You want to be relatively open in the ideas that are accepted, technically speaking, in your practice, but you don't want to have your practice plagued by religious discussion about this way is better, that way is better, and never-ending discussions where people just don't compromise.
Yeah.
That is another real drag. So sometimes it's just better to choose one, and at least you'll have some peace of mind to build with it, as long as it's okay to build with that one.
Yeah. What advice would you give a non-technical founder around making their first hire? There's one founder that I know who was non-technical, and he decided on the technology because he believed that that's what the go-to was in Silicon Valley. Any good company in Silicon Valley, this is what they're using. I'm not sure where that information came from. I'm sure, they spoke to certain people, relevant people, but if they spoke to another technical founder or a lead engineer elsewhere, they may have advised something else. For someone that perhaps has a great idea, what should they do? How should they approach building a technical team? What should be the first thing that they do?
There's two things there. One is how you choose and what should you be looking for. So you should be looking for someone who you trust to take that area of the company forward and override what your intuitions may be, because you deem that their knowledge and intuitions are better than yours. So first thing is be prepared for that. If you're not prepared for that, if you're not prepared to be told no, you're already doing it wrong. So be prepared for that.
That's so common.
It is because I'm the CEO, right?
Yeah.
It's my baby. I'm the CEO. I'm in charge, right? So why can't you just hire this and that instead of a front-end specialist? So be prepared for that is the first one. But then how to choose? If you're not technical, how can you determine who's the right fit for that role, even if you understand the role? So my suggestion there is to surround yourself with a couple of people from other walks of life or you deem capable, and just as consultants or as friends, get their advice and set up that small hiring committee, if you will, to help you with that. Don't just go with your gut. It's too risky. Some people talk a good talk. Some people don't. They might be good technically or not. And they might be good technically for a different kind of role. They might be great engineers for a different kind of role. And those are the nuances that a non-technical person can hardly easily have.
Absolutely. So let's say this non-technical person, if they haven't worked closely with a technical team, etc., even their decision around the advisor that they select is very subjective as well. How do they determine that this person is the right person to actually advise? What kind of questions should they be asking?
So now we're on the meta heuristics almost, right? If you want to put another heuristic or a rule for decision on top of those two, you can go with people that ask you questions. If I ask a friend, hey, I'm non-technical, I need to hire a CTO, would you help me? Sure, I'll help you. What you want? Oh, I just want to build this and that. If they start asking really good questions, then okay, this person is going to direct intellectual effort into understanding this, and they know where the roadblocks and the dead bodies are. They know their way around. If they don't question it very much, they might give you an opinion. They might give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on anyone else, but that probably carries a smaller signal or should.
I completely agree with you. I think first question is, why do you need a CTO to do what? What are your expectations of them, etc.? Because everyone has different definitions, thoughts in their heads, imaginings, I would even say.
Oh, yeah. There's so many questions to ask, right? Why are you even building this?
Yes, exactly.
Should you build?
Yeah.
Yeah. How important it is to get it right. Do you think you might still pivot in 1 or 2 years' time? How much money do you have?
Yeah, exactly.
So many questions.
Absolutely.
So many.
And I think where I see many leaders fail is the inability to have someone ask them questions. For some reason, I think it starts to tap the ego a little bit. For whatever reason, sometimes I think some people see it as an attack because they don't have the answers sometimes, but actually they don't realize that's actually good. I want you to tell me you don't have the answers because I then understand what you need to focus on, flesh out answers for. And some people aren't comfortable with not knowing the answers. They see it as, oh God, I don't know this. I'm going to look like I don't know anything. What am I doing? So I think there's insecurity in that. And then you also have those that they just don't want to invest time in those conversations. They see it as a waste of time. Just get on with it. And what they don't realize is you are basically creating the cross that will be permanently on your back. You won't be able to ever get this off if you don't tackle it head on now. And they just don't have the foresight to see it. They're not willing to put that extra time, effort, because it's not easy, work in, so that then actually it will be easier later on. They don't realize all that gritty, horrible,
compounds,
hard work. Yes, you need to do it because it will catch up with you at some point, and you don't want to build an organization and then it's catching up with you.
Absolutely not.
It's chaos.
Absolutely. And so much of that, I guess, is a direct cause of the way we see work and we understand it in our society. There's a lot of pressure to know it all. There's a lot of just assuming that this hierarchical tree is of command and control. The old style thing is the way it should be and the best way to do work. And so if we all took ourselves a little less seriously, put our egos apart and work a bit more collaboratively, it's not saying that hierarchy doesn't exist. It's not saying that we're all equal and we hold hands and sing Kumbaya and the magic product appears out of the back of a rainbow. With a unicorn. It's not saying that. Work has to be done. Some people have more abilities for this than others, some others more for that than others, and hierarchy still exists. It's just that maybe it's not such a strong pyramid, maybe it's a graph, and maybe it's a graph that can be ordered in multiple ways. That is, you can have hierarchy in different ways. You can have a hierarchy in understanding how the product organizes itself and sells itself. You can have a hierarchy on how technologies are used to build such a product. You can have a hierarchy on the relationships between the company and employees. So I've just described the three ones I think are most prevalent in tech companies, right? The delivery, the technical, and the human resources, which is a horrible expression. But
I love it.
I'd like to think of it more as employee relations. If we're still fixed up on those old ideas of hierarchy and needing to know it all and command and control, then a question can be a bit off-putting. Who are you to question my authority? When what we're after, assuming in most cases, in the case you describe, what we're after is clarification of the map we collectively hold for the territory. We're exploring the territory. We're asking questions. What we want is clarification. We want to at least know that we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if more founders and leaders were just a little bit, I don't know, I'm trying to find it, just had a little bit more I don't know, I would call it self-esteem.
You mean if they're a bit more resolved?
Yeah, like if you know yourself and you understand the value that you bring, you understand your own strength and you understand the role you play and that you're there to play, that you're there to facilitate, you're there to support people in doing the best job that they can do. You can't do what they do. So your role is there to ensure that they have the right environment to do that at an optimal level. So if you're confident and comfortable with that, then it just makes everyone's life so much easier. We can actually do our work and get things done. And I think what a lot of founders don't realize is, okay, so we're talking very much about the product and people's productivity, but even when it comes to hiring, the ability to hire people into that environment and culture that you're effectively building and then to retain them becomes difficult if we don't do all this early, especially when it comes to software engineers and trying to hire good software engineers. Because quite often when you explain to people, okay, this is how we work, this is how we tackle things. Again, anyone that you would want to hire in should also be asking questions. They'll be asking, what is the way of working? What systems and flows do you use? How does the business or senior management deal with challenges, etc.? And the way that is described is going to impact the decision that they make when it comes to actually joining the organization and the team. If you manage to maybe smooth that over a lot and the person then joins and sees reality, again, their happiness as an employee, you won't be able to retain that hire because that is not the way that they want to work. People want autonomy. They want to know you've hired them because they're specialists in an area that you are not. And you've got to give them room to do that. And you've got to give them room to make mistakes and fix things. Just because you hire a specialist doesn't mean they're always going to get it right, but they need the room for things to be wrong and to make the necessary improvements. And I think that judgment on, oh, this is wrong, you're shit. No, it's not as simple as that. I'm building something that is unique to this environment that we're in. And sometimes, or hopefully most times, that's going to go well. But I do need to know that I can fall and that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. So studies have shown time and again that psychological safety is what most important in creative work. And if you don't have that, then people won't take risks. They won't dibble and dabble here and there. Serendipity will just not happen. I, in my work, sometimes take a morning just to investigate this other thing that I can go, yeah, I know I'm conscious. I'm kind of wasting time. I'm not working on my actual story. I'm conscious of that, but sometimes it pays off. And yeah, guys, I've just discovered that blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
That is what someone, I forget who exactly, calls lateral productivity. I think it's a great name for that. The thing you were referring to early on about being sure in one's ways, it's not just for founders and for people, let's say, at the top of the organization, but also for other engineers. And for all of those, including CEOs, etc., I think the best way to step out of that ego trap is to understand that the work we achieve is not the choice of the best ideas, but more than the sum of the parts that go into some discussion. So whenever I say I now because I'm very lucky to work in a team that's very effective and a joy to work with.
Oh, that's nice.
It is. If we are able to really feel that when we go into a meeting to discuss something or to arrive at a certain outcome, that we're sure that what will come out of it is not the idea that I have while going into it, not the idea the other one has while going into it, but necessarily a better idea that is a product of that discussion. It shifts your stance to that of, I think we should do it this way. If anyone else has a better idea, then tell me. From that to, how about this? And then, how about that? Or maybe we can combine. But what about, that doesn't really work. Oh, no, yeah, you're right, actually. So it has to start at the very attitude or the very philosophical conception, if you will, that we have of these things. What is it to work with other people in knowledge work, in the intellectual, creative industry? It means to put our brains to the service of the company. It's not to offer our intellectual babies as a sacrificial offering to the company or anything like that. It's to hire our brains. Yeah. And we need to get over that idea that we need to prove our intelligence, right? Because knowledge work is so bounded almost solely by our cognitive output. It's almost like we're constantly proving ourselves, but we need to dissociate our identity, who we are, and the things that if people challenge might offend us from our cognitive output, and understand that that is contextual, right? It can work in different ways, in different places, in different times. And if we do that, then we realize that it's fine to just say, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, that solution doesn't work. And then magic happens.
And do you feel this type of culture, it's something that actually benefits the team members when it comes to well-being and therefore positively impacts their productivity? Because I think another side of this is a lot of companies, or especially startups, they're in a rush. We need to get this done. We need to get it done by this time. And so the business's needs or the pressure from the top because of the needs that, perhaps have been promised to the board, then actually starts to create an environment that doesn't necessarily suit the way that team members would work best. Sometimes the needs of the business can override that element too.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance, or how can that balance be created?
It's not easy, but it needs to come from a place of respect between both sides, if you will. So business and engineering, if you will. Nobody's saying, or at least I'm not saying, that sometimes you won't ever have a time where there's an overriding business need that is life or death for the company. And who cares about tech debt? Of course. And it would be wrong for an engineering team to to just say, no, now you have to wait a bit because we're doing things properly here. Those situations exist. When we talk about equilibrium, we need to gauge their importance and their frequency. And is this another emergency? We're not supposed to go from emergency to emergency. And so if that starts happening all the time, well, we all know what happens. It can be a negotiation between product and business and engineering, if you will, in the sense that they need to gauge the real pressure that is on either side, right? Yeah. And an equilibrium needs to be reached by truthful interactions of people that have mutual respect. If a CTO or anyone on the engineering team explains the reasons why rushing something might be wrong, they should explain those in business terms that can be translated to future costs, namely. A common mistake is to just say that it's wrong or that it will cause trouble for us. A better option is to put them in business terms, and it's not terribly complicated to do that. But having said that, the default strategy or default situation, in my view, should be that of not pressuring. People are there to work. People generally also care about the company, hopefully, or at least they care about doing a good job, if not that, at least. And most people I know in software development like what they do, and they take a non-negligible amount of pride in what they do. So the default situation, I think, should be of actually having no pressure. The pressure is natural. The pressure is them wanting to take the stories that are defined by product in the order that product defines and delivering them in the way that they think maximizes the value for the company given the time preference. This is an important one. I've said a few things here. So product gives stories, ordered stories, and it's up to the team, the engineering team, to take them and implement them. But it's crucial that the team is aware of the time preference of the company.
Yeah. Is there anything else about the ways that, or processes perhaps, that engineering teams or an ideal engineering team would follow in order to work effectively as a team?
Have a retrospective every now and then. Reflect about the current ways of working and how effective they've been for you in the recent past, and always be open to change. I've started working in software when waterfall was really a thing. Oh, those design documents and the test document. Oh, never again. Then Agile, and then we kind of went overboard with Scrum. XP was somewhat of a cult before, and then kind of became, this is how it should be, isn't it? And my current understanding is evolve it organically, evolve it for you. It will fall into certain common patterns, and if they work for you, great. If they don't, you won't fall into them, hopefully, and you'll probably have a minimally extractive or minimally intrusive process that just supports your work and doesn't get in the way.
Brilliant. How important is it to have a career progression framework in place?
That is very important. It removes a great deal of arbitrarity and ambiguity from promotion decisions, but also crucially, it gives you a lot of clarity on what it is that you need to do and behaviors you need to exhibit in order to get promoted, assuming you want to get promoted. And also very importantly, it forces the organization to think about them. It forces the organization to define them. It might force the organization to decide that, for example, that there is a technical progression path that is independent from the managerial one, for one, if they're still so old school that they haven't realized that yet. There are other more nuanced ramifications that the company might want to explore, but then clarity. If you exhibit this, then you're getting promoted. It also helps to have salary bands.
That makes sense. If a team knows this is in place, do you feel this is a motivator? Does it help them to work more effectively? Or are they working more towards that goal, let's say, and again, that's where actually having clear goals and KPIs comes in.
The way I've seen these engineering ladders be structured is so vertically you have the different functions and horizontally you have the different levels of seniority, or actually the other way around if you prefer. Yeah. And in each in each cell, you define things like the skills, the behaviors, and I'm missing another one. I forget now. But they are abstract enough that blind obedience to them or blind allegiance to them would not mean that you're not doing the work you're supposed to work. They would be an expression of good work. I've seen them written well enough that I wouldn't be worried if someone was just blindly following them to get promoted. They would have to do good work.
Yeah. Makes sense. So something that is really a huge conversation at the moment is hiring. There are two sides to that. One is, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. This war on talent. So one, just trying to attract people because there's so much competition. Sorry, it's war for talent. It's like war on talent.
I was going to ask you about that.
So yeah, there's this war going on for talent. And so one, it's that competition of trying to attract people. A lot of people make decisions on where they're going to join outside of some people just wanting to perhaps join certain brands. A lot of people decide based on that interview process. So based on that, especially with roles within engineering, for instance, you do need a specific skill set at a certain level, and you need to be able to measure that in some shape or form. What would you say is the best way to effectively interview a member of an engineering team?
We talked about the engineering ladder, and that helps you define the shape of your roles, or the roles that you have, or that you might come to have in the team. A few points. One is that when you're hiring, given it's a difficult thing nowadays at least, you as an organization should be prepared to find a person that fits your team instead of trying to find a person to slot into a vacant role. What I mean by this is that people have often several dimensions to their skills, and you might be thinking of hiring, a back-end developer with some testing skills and a little bit of front-end or a little bit of ops, whatever. At the same time, you might be hiring for a full ops operations engineer that knows a bit about continuous delivery, or a front-end that knows a bit about ops. I don't know, some combination thereof. And what I'm saying is that the organization would benefit from being flexible in the types of candidates they accept. It's possible that two good candidates would fill up those three needs that I've just kind of alluded to, or a different combination. I've experienced that when I really didn't want to be pigeonholed into being just a back-end engineer or just a platform engineer, but it felt like companies that were hiring for both couldn't decide where to put me. And I was like, just don't put me in such a box. So the first advice, I think, is for organizations to be flexible, to make fit a more dynamic test, not such a passive one. If you have that engineering ladder, use it to determine what are the needs. And from the needs that you have for your team, really think through what are the questions or the challenges that you can create and offer to the candidate that would actually give you a good signal on those needs. Going through that exercise is very important. Oftentimes, there's a bunch of questions on a shared document that the random interviewer of the day just last minute puts on their phone and goes through them. And that will most likely not reflect accurately the needs of the company at that point. And thirdly, structure your interview. Maybe write it down as accurately as you can without being overly restrictive. There's always room for improvisation during the interview, of course, but try to plan the interview as much as possible. That gives the candidate the impression and the assurance that things have been thought through, especially if you take notes during the interview, that you're trying to be as unbiased as possible. The fourth, but perhaps should be the first, it's a conversation, right? It's a two-way thing. Yes. You are selling the company as well. You perhaps selling you as a colleague, or maybe even a person with some authority over them. And there's so much to be said about how it is to work at a company. It is a two-way street. It is a conversation, and never forget about that.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking when we were working together, one of the things that was like a huge project was building a career progression framework, even bigger than that for us at the time, because the previous interview process just wasn't effective enough, was actually rehauling the interview process, making it much more informative and engaging. So it's not just you trying to pull from the candidate, but from the get-go, giving the candidate an indication of the setup, why they're needed, etc., what the challenges are, like having real conversations around, these are the challenges, this is what it's going to be like. What do you think? And I think just setting those kind of expectations, people expect roles to have challenges. And in fact, that's often why they go into a role. They want to help fix something or build something that's solving a problem.
Why do you need me?
Exactly.
And don't be put off by a question like that. Oh no, we have everything under control.
Yeah.
No,
everything's perfect.
Surely.
We're growing very quickly.
Where can I help?
Being very comfortable having those conversations really turned things around. And I found that even where perhaps people didn't pass the interview, they were still highly engaged. They were still very taken in by the opportunity. And more importantly, you and the team gave people a sense of the human beings they would be working with.
Oh, yes.
And that is also huge. It really does make a huge difference having the right kind of interview process and having the right people in the process as well.
Oh, yes.
Well, I really appreciate all your time on this conversation. It's been wonderful to chat to you and very insightful, as always.
Always a pleasure, Lola.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of A Human Perspective. Thank you so much, Vasco. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you.